Hey there, greetings everybody, and good evening. Welcome here to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. We're here with an episode called Commonalities Compared. This is a show we do every Sunday night. I try to be out at 8 o'clock, but I do a lot of preparation for work for the week, including making my lunches. So sometimes I get caught behind. Plus, you're trying to listen to music and write and make notes and cook food and all kinds of stuff at the same time. And sometimes it just doesn't work out. But today it did. So we are here to talk about a couple of albums that Ben has given me. And that's what we normally do here on Commonalities Compared. Gives me a couple of rock commonalities that I can compare, usually like two drummers, two bass players, two bands. In this case, it's two albums. The two albums he's given me tonight are The Band on the Run and All Things Must Pass. So All Things Must Pass, for those of you who are not as familiar with the title, is an album by George Harrison. Now, this album came out in 1970. The Band on the Run album, of course, is from Paul McCartney and Wings, came out in, I believe, 73. So that's one of the commonalities. They're both Beatles. The albums, I think, based on what I know about both bands and their albums, I would say these are probably their top albums. They're their most famous albums, the albums with the most known songs on them, and maybe their best albums. I'm not saying that is across the board the way it is, but that's pretty much the way I see it from this point of view. So, George Harrison's album is a double album as well, whereas The Band on the Run is just a single album. So, if I was to kind of characterize the two albums, I would say the All Things Must Pass is probably a host of different sounds. A lot of folky stuff here, a lot of pop stuff, of course, the big songs, My Sweet Lord, If Not For You. There's a few other tracks on here, that Isn't It a Pity. These are all well-known tracks. A couple Bob Dylan written songs here as well. I'd say his album has a lot of different sounds to it. There's some folky stuff here, some rocky stuff here. There's some poppy stuff, all kinds of different stuff on this album. Band on the Run, probably about the same, actually. Most people tend to think of Paul McCartney and Wings as a very commercial sounding pop band, but this album, Band on the Run, well, Jet and Band on the Run are both that style, very commercial sounding pop songs. Most of the rest of the album is kind of like George Harrison's. There's bits and pieces of all kinds of different styles of music going on here, including the vocal styles are quite different. On the George Harrison album, there are a ton of people playing on this album. Too many to list. I would be here for 10 minutes listening to people on here, but make a note that both John Lennon and Ringo Starr were also on this album. So a couple more of the other Beatles. So we got them all here, all four of them, right? The Fab Four, but in two different albums. I probably prefer the George Harrison album just because of the volume of different sounds to it, and I tend to like his voice. I also tend to like the songs he writes. They resonate with me well. One of my favorite songs by him, which is My Sweet Lord, fantastic tune. I just love it. However, having said that, the Paul McCartney album, this is the one Paul McCartney album that really kind of resonates with me. Band on the Run and Jet are both two songs I really like by him as well. I kind of like the Paul McCartney poppy sound. I think it suits him. I've never was a huge fan of his voice. Not that I disliked it. he was not. He was probably he might have been my least favorite of the Beatles members' voices. And not that he's bad. It's a good voice. I did like Ringo Starr's voice, but I only like Ringo Starr's voice with the Beatles. I don't really care much for his solo music, and I would have to say even John Lennon. I do not like most of the stuff that John Lennon did as a solo artist, and primarily because Yoko Ono was involved with a lot of it, and her voice just is like chalk. It's like nails on a chalkboard to me. So I can't listen to them. But the other two, McCartney and George Harrison, I like their solo stuff quite a bit. Especially Harrison's stuff, I think, resonates more with me. So both of these guys had good solo careers, and that's a good comparison. Like they both had George. It's arguable that George Harrison put out the best Beatles solo stuff. But Paul McCartney did very well in the commercial aspect of their music as well, especially with Wings. Maybe not so much since then, but early on, they both were probably the two biggest of the original four, solo-wise. Obviously, I think John Lennon was the primary driver, him and McCartney, primary drivers of the Beatles. I personally love John Lennon's voice. I think he has the best voice of the four. However, we're not discussing him tonight. But Harrison's been involved with some projects that I've enjoyed. But his solo stuff, at least early on, I really liked his solo stuff quite a bit. And this album definitely resonates very well with me. He's got a lot of different sounds here. And it's a double album, which is kind of lengthy. He probably could have cut it down to maybe, if he put all of his best stuff on one album, maybe that would have been enough. But maybe 3 sides would have been enough for sure. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Commonalities Compared, featuring Paul McCartney and Wings and the album Band on the Run, and George Harrison and his album All Things Will Pass, or All Things Must Pass. Can't remember actually the title. I guess I did write it down and I looked it up, but it's one of those titles that just doesn't stick in my brain for very long. I'm going to go back here and see if I can find it because I want to get it right. All Things Must Pass. All Things Must Pass, from George Harrison. So those are the 2 albums we did tonight. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Commonalities Compared. Please hit the like, subscribe, and notification bell. Also, if you want to make any comments about either of the 2 albums or either of the 2 artists, you can do that in the comment section below. Or if you want to ask me questions, or if you want to tell me stuff that you noticed, you can do that as well. And I hope you have a good evening, and we will see you next week for another episode of Commonalities Compared. Good night and take care.